leaders can be managers, but not all managers can be leaders. The difference between leadership and management. Leadership is difficult because you may or may not have the title. You may not have necessarily the hierarchical or reporting structure, even in the corporate world. I think anybody can be a leader in the sense you do not need to manage a group of, 50 people or be in the empire building. You can actually be an IC, individual contributor, but still be the leader where everybody looks at. Leadership is about the power of influence, like how much credit you have, how much strategy you have, how much empathy you have. And I think that's what makes a good leader. I think that's where the difference lies between leadership and management.
I think a manager can also be a leader, but to do that, they really have to have a lot of the soft skills, like knowing their people and what's motivating them as individuals. Because not everyone that you're managing is going to be motivated by the same thing. Even some salespeople are not as motivated by money as you would think. If you know that about your people because you've taken the time to really talk to them and understand what makes them tick, you can be a much better manager and get into that leadership category where you actually can inspire your people, knowing what they really care about. Because you want to create a positive culture where people are engaged and feel valued. And in order to do that, you have to really know them and model that from the top on down.
There's a term that's become popular, radical candor, and I saw a post recently they're calling it compassionate candor, which I think is great, but it's also really hard for people to adopt.
Once you begin to approach people in that very honest way, you see the results were always positive, and I got kind of addicted to it. And the fear goes away and the discomfort goes away. You kind of have to let yourself sit in that discomfort and hopefully have a few wins where the results were very positive, and then it becomes easier and easier. Since we were bootstrapping, it was just me for a couple years, and I took on a partner, and then we ran the business for almost 6 years without any full-time employees. We were just working with contractors. And then in 2016, we started hiring, and then we hired, continually throughout the rest of the life of the business up to like 28 full-time employees. And that's a very different thing. You really have to shift to working on your team and supporting and managing your team as opposed to supporting and managing the business. And if you're doing your job correctly, you're pushing more responsibility and authority to your team, and you have to empower them to run it and make decisions. And that's hard to do when you've been running the show and having your hands in everything for so long. Even when we did have a couple of full-time employees early on, I didn't act like a manager. I acted like a peer. They were pretty much doing the same stuff that I was doing in a lot of ways. We were peers in the trenches. And so I would commiserate with them and complain about things. And then that gave everyone else permission to complain and commiserate. And there was a point where I just brought a couple of our first employees into a room and I said, look, I did this and it was the wrong thing to do. And I'm going to stop doing this. And I need you to stop doing it, because guess what? We're bringing in 2 people just out of college next week. And if they see you panicking and complaining, they're going to think that's okay. It's going to become part of our culture. So this has to stop today. I even pounded the table. But, the more you can own your part in whatever the dysfunctional pattern is, the easier that employees can accept it and, respect you for changing course.
A lot of the toxicity that we see in the corporate world is because these things don't exist there. Unlike Sharon, we had a team right on the onset. But that didn't mean that I would just delegate and just walk away. And I still had to be in the trenches. I still had to do the mundane things that needed to be done and fill the gaps wherever there were gaps. That's also a part of being a leader, right? On the things their team is too busy or they can't do because they don't have the expertise, right? There's a lot of ambiguity when you're building something new. Your quintessential corporate world where people are reporting into you, and then you're kind of giving them tasks and then monitoring those tasks. You don't have that luxury in a startup. Those are my points on leadership within a startup. Kind of very different from a corporate environment. Everybody talks about, managing up, and that's the mantra that's going around in the corporate world. That does not fly at all in a startup. Pardon my French, it's complete BS. In a startup world, you really cannot do that. You have to be candid, and you have to empower your people and not just sit on your high horse. Because as a leader, I don't want to be managed up. I want to hear the truth of what's going on so that I can take the right actions. I just don't have the cushion of being managed up, or my ego being massaged, or my emotions being managed, right? I want to know what's happening. I think should be in the DNA of a startup founder or of an entrepreneur.